In this video, we're going to talk about how we can subtract integers just by making sense of it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out using stairs so that we can visually see kind of what we're doing so that we can make sense. So, and before we even subtract, we're going to look at this problem up here that we have -1 plus 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at 0. And so our 0 is just landing right here, so it's as if it's right where we're starting before we can either walk up the steps for the positive or down the steps for the negatives. And so what we have is we're going to start with -1. And so what we're doing is we're facing down the steps and we're going to walk forward 1 step. And so the way that we can, I kind of show that we're facing that way is by whichever way that the arrows are. So here the arrow is underneath the steps. That means that we're facing that way and we're walking forward. Okay? And so right there after, so we're at -1, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn around and we're going to face the positives because our 5 is positive. So we're going to walk up 1 step and we're back at 0 where we started, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you'll see that we are on the 4th step above where we started. And so our answer would be 4. So using that concept, we can look at the difference and now when we are subtracting. So we're going to go ahead and look to see what we start with. So we're going to start with -1 and we're going to actually walk down, facing the negatives, down to 1 step. So we're at -1. And now here is the part that can kind of get confusing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look to see that this is a positive. So what we're going to do is we're going to look, so I'm going to be up top, we're going to look at the positive. So if we can imagine that we're on the staircase, and we're looking like we want to go up. But when we had the when we were adding, we were walking forward. And so to kind of develop that understanding of opposites with positive and negatives, well, the opposite of adding is subtracting. And so what's the opposite of walking forward? We'll be walking backwards. And so what we're going to actually do is while we would be facing like we were going up, we're actually going to walk backwards 5 steps. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what you'll see is that we will end -2, -3, -4, -5, and -6. So we're ending on the 6th step below from where we started. For the second problem, for 2 minus 7, we're going to see that we have 2. So we're going to walk up the steps forward to 2. 1, 2, and we're going to stop. And then we're going to look here that we have a +7. So we're going to continue looking as if we're going to go up the steps. But again, with subtracting is the opposite of adding. In adding, we were walking forward. With subtracting, what we're going to do is we're going to walk backwards. So now we're at 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And you'll see that what we ended up doing is we ended up walking back past 0 and then 5 more steps. And we ended up at the 5th step below 0. And so our answer would be -5. And then another visual that we can use is counters. And so what we do is we have our red counters, which represent negatives. Right? And now one thing that I really discourage is using the word subtract or minus, just because it doesn't make sense in our everyday language. And so the way that I get students to make sense of it is just by saying the word take away. just by thinking about what we can take away, and especially using the counters, we'll see that we can't take something away if we don't have it. So for example, I'm going to make this a little smaller. So we start out with -1, or 1 negative. And what I need to do is I need to take away 5 positives, but we can see that we don't have any positives to take away. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually manipulate our number, our -1, so that we can actually see 5 positives. And so you can always ask yourself, what number can I add to any number and it still be that same number? And what we'll notice is that we can add 0. And what we can do is we can actually represent 0 by using counters. So right now what I've done is I've added 0, a -1 and a +1 equal 0, additive inverse. And so right now we can see that I have 1 positive that I could take away. Now I add another 0 pair. Now I have 2 positives, but the whole thing still equals -1 because I have 1 negative on top. I'll draw a line to kind of separate. This is what we started with right here. And then below, all I'm doing is I just keep adding zeros. And so right now I can see 2 positives, and what I need to do is I need to add 3 more. 0 pairs. So that now that what we see is we see 6 negatives, and then we see 5 positives. But now what I can do is now I can go ahead and do what the problem tells me to do. So the problem says to take away 5 positives, and so what I'll do is we'll go ahead and start. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so when I take those away, now our number changes, and what we can see is that we're going to be left with 6 negatives. Okay? And then the problem down below, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and see what we start with. So we're going to start with 2 positives. And then we need to take away 7 positives. Well, with the problem up top, we had negatives, and we had to take away positives, so we didn't even have any positives to take away. But with this problem, you can see that we already have 2 positives that we can take away. And so what we can do to these 2 counters is that we can go ahead and begin adding 0. And so I'll go ahead and add 1 0 pair. All right, so right now our number is still 2 because all I've added is 0. But now it looks as if we have 3 positives and 1 negative. And so now we can continue adding 0 pairs so that we can take away 7 positives. 7. And so now we see that 2 plus -5 plus +5 right now still equals 2. So now we can go ahead and take away our 7 positives, and what we'll see is that we're left with 5 negatives. So -5. And then in this last strategy, you'll see that how we can just add by the additive inverse when we're subtracting. But I want to make sure that we're making sense of why we can do that. So we're going to start with -1, and we see that we need to take away 5 positives. And so what I can do is I can manipulate our -1 so that we can see that we would have plus 5 plus a -5, which when we look, we'll see that that actually equals 0. So that's the same thing as saying -1 plus 0. I just manipulated it. But I manipulated it so that we can actually see 5 positive. And then with this, just like we did with the counters, we can take away now our 5. So we can either cross it out like this, or you can rewrite it as -1 plus 5 plus a -5, take away the 5 positive. And we'll see that we're going to end up with -1 plus -5, which is the additive inverse of 5, and then we'll get -6. And the same can be done for down here at the bottom. We would have 2, but I can manipulate our 2 so that we can see that it's 2 plus a -7 plus a +7, which is again the same thing as saying 2 plus 0, because when we combine those two, we end up with now we're adding 0 to 2. And so now what we can do is we can go ahead and take away our 7, and what we're left with when we take the 7 away is 2 plus -7, which then if we just make sense of it by even using the stairs or visualizing the counters, we'll see that we would have 2 0 pairs and we would be left with -5. And then there's also one other way too that you could think about it. So if we go back, I won't go to red and yellow, it'll be a little, so let's say we have 2, and we still need to take away 7 positives. And so we already know that we have 2 positives that we can take away. And so rather than adding 7 and -7 like we did down here at the bottom, what we can do is we can already see that we can take 2 away, and so now we can just add 5 and -5, which again, these two combined still equals 0. But now what we can see is that, well, now I can take 7 away, and we're left with -5.